think of ourselves as the most powerful beings in the universe, it's unsettling to discover that we're wrong. Time has come to see the world as it is.
Can we pull back the veil of static and reach into the source of all being? Behind this curtain lies this random pattern generator. You will be responsible for an escalation that will destroy everything.
In this episode, I'm going to talk about something a bit unconventional in regards to the occult: cartoons. Over the years of interacting with spirits and spiritually viewing them, I noticed that certain aspects of their movements and actions reminded me of cartoons. It's not that they look like painted animation cells or anything like that. It's that their movements can be very quick and their behavior a bit stylized, if you will. They seem to be moving at a frame rate which is higher than that of physical life even. It's like if our world is a choppy old video game running at a very low frame rate, then their world is running full clip at a healthy 30 frames per second. This got me thinking about aspects of biological evolution and how an organism's means of personal expression has advanced in complexity and intensity as life has evolved over the ages. Think about some of the lowest, most ancient and simple forms of life, single-celled organisms. Not only do they not have a face of any sort, they don't even have a head. Then, on down the evolutionary line, insects have heads and faces, though their faces provide no expression. Insects instead tend to express themselves with sounds and movements. Fish, amphibians, and reptiles also have a lack of facial expression. Moving even further onward in evolution, mammals develop rudimentary facial expression. This merely comprises narrowing eyes, baring teeth, raising or lowering ears, but it is still more facial expression than can be found among insects, amphibians, fish, and reptiles. Primates then go on to evolve even more nuance to their expressions. Now, where we stand in evolution as human beings, our facial expressions are even more developed than monkeys and apes. This made me think, well, what has even more facial expression and elasticity than human beings? Cartoons. Whether it's a Tex Avery Wolfman's eyes popping out of his head and his tongue lolling on the ground when he sees a sexy lady, or Robin Williams' genie character in Aladdin suddenly and constantly morphing into different forms, characters, and impersonations, we have imbued cartoon characters with even more stylization, range of movement, and expression than we have as living physical humans. This reminded me of something I've discovered regarding recent human creations, technology, and inventions. So many of these things which we've brought into the world, be it the printing press, telephone lines, mechanical transportation, television, the internet, video games, virtual reality, and personal devices, appear to be transforming our world slowly, over time, into a world with much more in common with the spirit realms than what our gross, natural, physical environment has provided us. It's almost like we all unconsciously remember this other place with other rules and more freedom, and have been trying to recreate it here with technology for ages. I would count the hyper-stylization of animation as a part of that ongoing beautiful process of transformation. Almost like super advanced coral, the human race has been building around it a tech-based recreation of the spirit realms themselves. And now, the news.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
What was the three-toed creature killing animals in Ohio? When AREC researchers Dennis Peliches and Bill McIntyre saw the news clipping in the Valley News, they immediately contacted the paper to find out more about the witnesses. It was the summer of 1981, and some citizens of the city of Rome, Ohio, had been reporting unusual activity around the swamp near the Grand River. The evidence, based on eyewitness accounts, including unidentified footprints and animal mutilations, were reportedly investigated by the area's sheriff's department. The results were inconclusive. Going to the actual location of the alleged creature sighting allowed Peliches and McIntyre to gather more information by interviewing the eyewitnesses. What they found out was that the animal waited until 9 p.m. to go out to feed. The tracks, Peliches said, were three-toed, measuring 14 inches long, 6 inches wide, with a depth of 1.5 inches. According to the witnesses, the creature was 9 feet tall, had a hairless face, and fang-like teeth. Furthermore, two of the typical and most controversial features of these types of encounters, the red glowing eyes and the unusual odor, were also present. But it wasn't only one individual creature that the men had spotted. There were a few of them in the swamp. They fired shots at them, but it seemed to have no effect, they explained. Peliches and McIntyre claimed to have photos of the tracks, casts, and video interviews, but they decided not to publish any of them, including the eyewitness names, in order to keep the land clean of hunters and sightseers. One thing that appears to be of interest in this case is the statement regarding the trail of shots fired at the creatures. This futile attempt at destroying the creature could indicate that there was an additional factor involved in the sighting, such as a dimensional anomaly. We're looking at a Chupacabra sighting? The first sighting of this cryptid was documented in 1995. Later reports skyrocketed, reaching a peak between 1996 and 1999. Keep in mind that the story of the three-toed creature of Ohio hasn't gained popularity over the years. It also hasn't garnered further attention from researchers, which is surprising, as it shares many similarities with the strange events occurring at the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, including their latitude coordinates. There is little doubt that the South American continent is a place of copious reports of strange occurrences and paranormal phenomena. From Mexico to Brazil through Chile, Puerto Rico, and Argentina, incredible creatures accounts have been documented for centuries. The Nazca lines of Peru, or the Las Caritas petroglyphs of the Dominican Republic, are just a few examples of the multiple locations where alleged ancient visitations have taken place. The 1970s was a decade of high UFO activity in the Dominican Republic, robot men, UFO pilot sightings, and unexplained animal mutilations. But there is one incident in particular that many haven't heard about, the supposed humanoid encounter that shocked the town of Paya, located on the southern coast of Hispaniola. On November 6, 1972, a UFO reportedly flew over a house where a religious ceremony aimed at helping a sick person was being held. The afflicted woman, 45-year-old Ramona de Baez, had been suffering from stomach cancer for some time and was now lying in bed while surrounded by the fervorous believers. Julia Elveira, one of the guests, said she saw a light like a large star through the window. When the congregants noticed the intense light, panic ensued and everyone froze. The man holding the prayers explained that an angel had taken his hand prior to guiding him back to the sick woman's bed. Then witnesses said the entity purportedly placed its hands upon de Baez, who immediately fell asleep. According to the woman, when she woke up, she didn't feel ill anymore. She also said that she felt a sensation of cold from the alien's touch. One wonders, however, why this extraordinary event has not been further investigated by researchers. There are merely two sources containing the story. One is the APRO Bulletin from January 1982. The other is the supplemental information provided by Scott Corrales in 2006 in his article titled UFOs over Hispaniola. Religious and paranormal healing claims have always been a topic of controversy, which could have prompted other researchers to dismiss this case from the start in an effort to keep the possible public ridicule at bay. Recently, one of the multiple soldiers who witnessed a UFO incident at the Bardenas Reales Air Force firing range in Spain finally broke his silence and told the story to the press. Even though this is considered a case of importance to ufologists across the world, given the location, circumstances, and nature of the witnesses, it was either ignored or missed at the time, possibly due to a language barrier, and to our knowledge, the initial official report has never been updated. Hoping to serve UFO researchers and enthusiasts alike, it was important to keep an eye on this relatively new information. The revelations came almost 40 years after a mysterious dome-shaped aircraft that landed at the firing range had kept the Spanish Air Force on alert for 48 hours. Vincent Martinez, a soldier on duty at the firing range in 1975, was on patrol that night of January when he noticed a strange object. I remember being on patrol that night. It was probably around 11:30 or 12 a.m. when the radio, one of those big radios the Americans at the base would let us use, started making an interference noise, so I wondered what was going on. I looked out through the window and I noticed a light, an object with a white light pointing upward. Suddenly the white light went out and it became orange, he told a Spanish TV show. He then used the phone to notify the corporal of the guard, who came to the scene a few minutes later. Multiple witnesses observed the light, which, according to the official report, acquired by J.V. Ballester Olmos from declassified Spanish Air Force UFO files just a few years ago, was now shaped like a half moon and the size of a semi-trailer truck. The object rose, showing white lights on top and bottom, and a pulsating amber and white light around it. Then it flew in the direction of the tower. We were 4 there at the guard post watching the object. The light flashed on our faces, so when it was gone we went out to see and we noticed a reddish thing on the same spot, and it must have been the fire coming out of the object because when we got closer the fire was still going on the ground. The problem was that we weren't able to tell what it was in the darkness of the night. Next day some of us went to check out the place and we saw a circumference measuring 33 feet in diameter, 1 foot deep, completely charred, he said. One soldier said he was so close to the object that he was able to feel its strange heat. Others even claimed that their boots became soft, as if affected by some sort of energy. They told us not to talk about this. They canceled our days off and we had to stay there all night. We cordoned off the area with machine guns and all that because all sorts of people were arriving to see what was going on, journalists, the military, so they told us to cordon off the area and deny entry to anyone, Martinez confessed. Hours earlier, 5 members of the military had observed 4 other similar unidentified flying objects hovering over the city of Burgos. Countless legends and ancient books detail the goblin's human-like appearance, and now hundreds of researchers and people who claim to have seen the cryptid keep flooding the internet with videos and theories in an effort to explain what these creatures really are. from extraterrestrial explanations like the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter to bloodline associations of the creature with the shy gnome or the mischievous leprechaun. In 2012, a man captured a mysterious image he believes could contain a being walking through the woods with a lantern. The video, taken by a trail camera in an undisclosed location of North America and shared on YouTube by user 123superbox, shows a pair of deer grazing at night, suddenly startled by an unknown source of light and what looks like a being coming out of the grass. The light and the strange shape then vanish, reappearing seconds later on a different location on the screen. The man said, "I went out one day and checked my trail camera a few days after I set it up, and this is what I found. If you look closely, it looks like a creepy being holding some sort of lantern." The figure, he explained, can't be human because a normal white-tailed deer would run off at the sight and sound of a human, and the deer keep looking at the being and go right back to eating. On October 16, 1954, at 21:45 hours, in Dampierre, France, Monsieurs Deschamps and Leclotre saw a craft about 20 meters diameter, 2 meters high, come within 4 meters of the ground for 3 or 4 minutes. It gave off a yellowish light and a glow extended for 4 meters around. On October 16, 1954, at 2400 hours in Siena, Italy, several people saw a landed object in a meadow. It appeared phosphorescent and of large size. It took off very suddenly. On October 17, 1954, at Saint-Cyr-sur-Mer, France, Leon B., a city council member, saw a circular orange craft take off from the ground. On October 17, 1954, at O Elvito, Portugal, a hunter, Manuel Madeira, saw an object which flew away as he approached it, rose in the sky, and was lost to sight. On October 17, 1954, at 14:30 hours, in Cabasson, France, a 65-year-old man was hunting with his dog near the junction of the Brelance Canal and the Durance River when he saw a gray object about 4 meters long, 1 meter high on the ground, and 40 meters away. It showed a dome from which 2 helmeted figures emerged. The witness fled, but his dog started towards the object. The dog soon retreated, walking awkwardly as if partially paralyzed. On October 17, 1954, at 20:30 hours, in Varigny, France, several witnesses, among them Mr. Beauclair, a policeman, saw a bright red dome-shaped object descend to ground level 20 meters away. The underside showed red and white lights. On October 17, 1954, at night, in Cape Masulo, Italy, on Capri, an artist, Raffaele Castelli, saw a disc 5 meters in diameter land on the property of Curzio Malaparte. Upon approaching it, he discovered it was not a helicopter and saw 4 dwarfs wearing coveralls emerge from it. After 30 minutes, the craft made a soft whirring sound and rose vertically, leaving blue sparks. Now moving to strange events in Spain. Off Alcacibra, Castellon, divers saw a 20-foot metallic object lying on seabed. Next day, a friend saw something leave the sea in that area, and the diver later found the cylinder had gone. 26th to 27th July 1970. In Arroyo de la Miel, Malaga, object dived in a lake, then emerged and flew off, September 1971. In Belmez de la Moraleda, Andalusia, faces appeared on cement floor, voices also heard, 1971 onwards. Near Quintayana, stone shot upward from ground accompanied by detonation, 2 hours on morning of May 4, 1910. In Huesca, 8 man seen in the Pyrenees, 6 feet tall and naked, emitting animal-like sounds, threw tree trunk at workers, may have been a feral child rather than relic humanoid, May 1979. At Isla Cristina, Huelva, boys saw a luminous UFO emerge from sea and disappear, 8th February 1981. Near Jerez de la Frontera, Cadiz, man on motorcycle saw 2 humanoids looking like Michelin Man, May 1960. In La Codosera, Badajoz, children and adults 100 in all saw several apparitions of Blessed Virgin Mary, May 1945. Near La Coruña, large shining disc-shaped UFO rose with explosive noise and shot away at great speed, 5th November 1954. In Lyon, young woman saw 2 men with silvery objects on their backs, who flew away. Next day seen by several other people, around 1914. In Puente de la Herrera, Valladolid, 8-foot-high UFO with colored lights seen on ground with entity beside it, seemingly interested in alfalfa field. Afterwards, road glowed where UFO had stood, 15th August 1970. In Valencia, Caravelle airliner made emergency landing after being followed by UFO, 11th November 1979. In Vilares del Saz, Cuenca, illiterate boy cowherd saw big balloon UFO on the ground, out of which came tiny, about 26 inches tall entities with yellow faces. They spoke, but he did not understand, and one smacked his face. Early July 1953. In Voltania, winged woman seen flying over town by many witnesses, June 1905. In Zaragoza, poltergeist outbreak, November to December 1934.
What the hell in God's name is going down?
That was a public service announcement designed to scare the shit out of you. abducted by aliens earlier this afternoon.
That little girl got lost under the bed. She went into an alternate dimension.
I'm going to read the article The Crying of Liber 49, Jack Parsons, Antichrist Superstar, written by Richard Metzger. It can be found in the collection The Book of Lies, The Disinformation Guide to Magic and the Occult. When the history of the American space program is finally written, no figure will stand out quite like John Whiteside Parsons. Remarkably handsome, dashing and brilliant, Jack Parsons was one of the founders of the Experimental Rocket Research Group at Caltech, California Institute of Technology, and the group's 7-acre Arroyo Seco testing facility would eventually become the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, NASA's Rocket Design Center. Werner von Braun allegedly claimed it was the self-taught Parsons, not himself, who was the true father of the American space program for his contribution to the development of solid rocket fuel. Although Parsons has been memorialized with a statue at JPL and has had a crater on the dark side of the moon named in his honor, his story remains shrouded in mystery. For what is little known about this legend of aerospace engineering is that Parsons was an avid practitioner of the occult sciences, and for several years, Aleister Crowley's hand-picked leader of the U.S. branch of the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Southern California-based Agape Lodge. Parsons was born in Los Angeles on October 2, 1914, the son of a wealthy and well-connected family living in a sprawling mansion on Pasadena's Millionaire Row. His father worked for Woodrow Wilson. After his parents divorced, the solitary childhood of Parsons imbued him with a deep hatred of authority and contempt for any sort of interference in his activities. Parsons' interest in the occult apparently commenced at an early age, and in one of his diaries, he claimed to have evoked Satan at the tender age of 13. After discovering Crowley's philosophy of Phlema, Parsons joined the Agape Lodge in 1941. Wilfred T. Smith, the expatriate Englishman who started the order in the early 1930s with a charter from the Great Beast himself, wrote of Parsons in a letter to Crowley, "I think I have at long last a really excellent man, John Parsons." And starting next Tuesday, he begins a course of talks with a view to enlarging our scope. He has an excellent mind and much better intellect than myself. John Parsons is going to be valuable. Another member of the lodge, Crowley's old friend actress Jane Wolfe, described Parsons as 26 years of age, 6'2", vital, potentially bisexual at the very least, University of the State of California Caltech, now engaged in Caltech Chemical Laboratories developing bigger and better explosives for Uncle Sam. Travels under sealed orders from the government, writes poetry, sensuous only, he says, lover of music, which he seems to know thoroughly. I see him as the real successor of Therion or Crowley. Passionate, and has made the vilest analyses result in a species of exaltation after the event. Has had mystical experiences which gave him a sense of equality all around, although he is hierarchical in feeling and in the established order. Parsons rose quickly through the ranks, taking over the Agape Lodge from Smith at Crowley's decree within a year. One of the most celebrated feats in magical history, Parsons and pre-Dianetics L. Ron Hubbard, whose role was too complicated to describe in this short essay, performed the Babylon Working, a daring attempt to shatter the boundaries of time and space and intended to bring about, in Parsons' own words, love, understanding, and Dionysian freedom, the necessary counterbalance or correspondence to the manifestation of Horus. The above reference recalls Crowley's announcement of the Aeon of Horus, described in the Book of the Law, Liber al Legis, a blasphemous, strangely beautiful prose poem that Crowley received from a discarnate entity called Iwas in Cairo in 1904. Crowley, self-styled Great Beast 666, considered himself the avatar of the Antichrist, and the Book of the Law is a proclamation that the era of the slave gods, Osiris, Allah, Jesus, had come to an end, and that the Aeon of Horus, the crowned and conquering child, had begun. In its infancy, Crowley predicted the Aeon would be characterized by the magical formula of bloodshed and blind force, the tearing down of the established orders to make way for the new. Crowley held the 2 world wars as evidence of this, but did not see the Horus force as evil, rather as embodying the innocence of a hyperactive child who was like a bull in a china shop. Babylon, a Thelemic counterpart of Kali or Isis, was described by Parsons as black, murderous, and horrible, but her hand is uplifted in blessing and reassurance, the reconciliation of opposites, the apotheosis of the impossible. The impossible was precisely what Jack Parsons, the scientific sorcerer, had in mind. In its initial stages, the Babylon Working was intended to attract an elemental to serve as a partner for Parsons' elaborate sex magic rituals. The method employed was that of the solo 8-degree workshop of the OTO, the quasi-Masonic organization reformulated by Crowley in the earlier part of the century in accordance with his do-what-thou-wilt mythos. Parsons used his magical wand to whip up a vortex of energy so the elemental would be summoned. Translated into plain English, Parsons jerked off in the name of spiritual advancement, whilst Hubbard, referred to as the scribe in the diary of the event, scanned the astral plane for signs and visions. Apparently it worked. In a letter to Crowley dated February 23, 1946, Parsons exclaimed, "I have my elemental. She turned up one night after the conclusion of the operation and has been with me since." The elemental was a green-eyed, flaming redhead named Marjorie Cameron, later of Kenneth Anger's inauguration of the Pleasure Dome film, and a beatnik artist of some renown. Cameron was only too happy to participate in Parsons' sex magic, and now Parsons could get down to the real business of the Babylon working, the birthing of a moonchild or homunculus. The operation was formulated to open an interdimensional doorway, rolling out the red carpet for the appearance of the goddess Babylon in human form, employing the angelic language of the Enochian calls of Elizabethan magus John Dee, and the attraction of the sex force of the duo's copulation to this end. As Paul Rydeen points out in his extended essay Jack Parsons and the Fall of Babylon, the purpose of Parsons' operation has been underemphasized. He sought to produce a magical child who would be a product of her environment rather than of her heredity. Crowley himself describes the moonchild in just these terms. The Babylon working itself was preparation for what was to come, a thelemic messiah. To wit, Babylon incarnate as a living female, the Scarlet Woman is consort to the Antichrist, bride of the Beast 666. In effect, Parsons also claimed the mantle of Antichrist for himself, as the magical heir of Crowley prophesied in Liber A. The child of thy bowels, he shall behold them, the mysteries of the apocalypse. Expect him not from the east nor from the west, for from no expected house cometh that child. Without the Scarlet Woman, the Antichrist cannot make his manifestation. The eschatological formula must first be complete. In wider words, with the magical rites of the Babylon working, it was Parsons' goal to bring on the apocalypse. Parsons' Babylon gambit was dazzling to say the least. If the earth must first be covered in evil before the return of the Christ consciousness and the final triumph of good, what better way to hasten the uplifting of humanity than to rip an alchemical hole in the fabric of reality and invite the very spawn of hell in for a rip-snorting orgy of howling madness? So much is written of Parsons as a psychotic lunatic, but I put it to you, dear reader, is the Babylon working the product of the deranged mind, or the ultimate exploration of the absolute furthest reaches of consciousness, putting the pedal to the metal for the absolute living end and revolutionary chic and mind expansion? Parsons' perverse imitation of Christ was intended to disrupt, oppose, and subvert the established order of things. It's the age-old Manichean battle between good and evil, the forces of order and chaos, the status quo versus revolutionary tendencies. But in the 21st century, these lines have become significantly blurred. As Kenneth Grant said in Outside the Circles of Time, Parsons opened a door and something flew in. Did the Babylon working actually work? For the sake of argument, if you believe it to be true, it's true enough. As a metaphor or a myth to explain the psychic and atmospheric turbulence taking place in the world today, it certainly works for me. What has long been prophesied by the world's major spiritual traditions is now coming to pass. Turn on CNN for a couple of hours of ample proof. Terrorism, wars, killer viruses, floods, famines, violent crime, earthquakes, suicide bombers, the list goes on and on. Certainly Parsons' untimely death in a 1952 chemical explosion would leave the crown of the conquering child unclaimed to this day as Selamites continue to await their chaos messiah, but perhaps Parsons was an antichrist and his particular mission was to pry open the apocalyptic gateway and activate the occult forces necessary for the upheaval of consciousness. The apostles of the new forms of gnosis unearthed by the Babylon working will be art, the inspired initiator of sacred science, and the torch of gods appearing in new and unexpected forms in the unfolding of the divine drama. The poets, artists, philosophers, and thinkers will form the first ranks of perfected humanity, and no rules will apply save for nobility and freedom beyond the Kali Yuga. But this will not happen without a struggle between the forces of control, black magic, and oppressive boredom on one hand, and the Luciferian agents of wisdom, unleashed creativity, and anarchic rebellion on the other. What we have been brainwashed to believe is good, patriotism, so-called free enterprise, private property, Christianity, not the teachings of Christ, but the hateful travesty that the religion bearing his name has become, thanks to the likes of Pat Robertson and his filthy ilk, is now beginning to be seen by the emerging generation of the crowned and conquering child to be the death trip bullshit it truly is. A whole culture is collapsing, and a new one is about to be born. Jack Parsons would be pleased.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
I'm going to read an excerpt from the book My Life with the Spirits by Lon Milo DuQuette. The Western magical tradition teaches there are 10 major landmarks in the initiate's journey. These, of course, aren't geographic landmarks, rather they are 10 progressively higher levels of consciousness. Students of Eastern mysticism are quick to point out that at least 7 of these landmarks of consciousness correspond nicely with the 7 chakras or psychic centers in the human body. Either way you look at it, attainment to the next level endows the initiate with greater insight, wisdom, and power. When Crowley wrote about knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, he was referring specifically to achieving and maintaining the level of consciousness corresponding to the 6th Sephira of the Tree of Life. In Eastern terms, this coincides with the opening of the Anahata chakra, heart or Christ center, in the human psychic body. Until the initiate has achieved this level of consciousness, he or she is more or less blind to the true nature of his or her spiritual condition, and therefore ill-equipped to make competent magical decisions. The only acts of magic that are lawful before this grade is achieved are those designed to break down obstacles that prevent the magician's magical progress toward that goal. Consequently, magical workings at this stage of one's career are a hit-and-miss affair, and often meet with less than roaring success. So high is the failure rate that many magical instructors forbid their students from dabbling in anything other than the invocation of the Holy Guardian Angel. It is true that if I had listened to my teacher before I evoked Ouroboros for the first time, I could have spared myself the agonizing pain of burning my eyes with cinnamon oil. If the object of the operation is not one's unambiguous will, or if your will is divided against itself for one reason or another, the energy you pour into the magic just seems to make things worse. A most dramatic example of such a breed of formula occurred when I tried to share a demon with a friend for the purpose of prospering a business venture. In 1981, Matt Benton, an old musician friend of mine who had recently earned his PhD in psychology, offered me a job editing a series of books he had written in conjunction with a therapeutic board game he had developed in grad school. It was, without a doubt, the best job I ever had. The pay was good and the work was very interesting. It even included a car. A little less than a month after I started the job, the project was hit with some unforeseen and expensive surprises. A sizable chunk of investment capital had been withdrawn, and unless new cash could be injected into the enterprise, the project and my job would have to be postponed. The only way Matt could quickly raise the needed cash was to secure another loan on his already heavily encumbered home. In desperation, he took counsel with an attorney of colorful integrity, and together they filed loan paperwork that can only be described as surreal. Knowing that I would prefer to keep working, Matt asked if there was anything magical I could do to assure that the loan committee would somehow approve the package without reading it. I figured it was my unambiguous will to keep working, so I foolishly suggested that we enter into a joint evocation of Goetic spirit. Matt loved the idea. We thumbed through the text together and settled on Belial, the 68th spirit of the Gosha, a spirit I had heretofore not evoked. The text reads, Belial, he is a master and powerful king, and was created next after Lucifer. He appeareth in the form of two beautiful angels sitting in a chariot of fire. He speaketh with a comely voice, and declareth that he fell first from among the worthier sort that were before Michael and other heavenly angels. His office is to distribute presentations and senatorships, etc., and to cause favor of friends and of foes. He giveth excellent familiars, and governeth 80 legions of spirits. Note well that this King Belial must have offerings, sacrifices, and gifts presented unto him by the exorcist, or else he will not give true answers unto his demands. But then he tarrieth not 1 hour in the truth, unless he be constrained by divine power. Because Belial appears as two spirits, I thought it particularly appropriate for an operation involving two magicians. I had never performed a dual evocation before. I didn't realize at the time that it was the stupidest idea in the world, so I was unsure as to the best way to proceed. I decided Matt and I should operate simultaneously from two different locations, our respective homes. I set to work making 2 poster board triangles and 2 paper versions of Belial's sigil. I also engraved the demon sigil on 2 copper discs. On the back of each disc I engraved the classic tetragrammaton pentagram. These we would wear around our necks during the evocations. I wrote up 2 outline rituals. Mine would be the more elaborate version similar to the one I used for the evocation of Ouroboros and others. Matt's version was very simple and designed primarily to link his temple with mine. Matt lived less than 2 miles from my home, so it was very easy for me to go to his house and help him set up his circle and triangle and assure myself that he and his temple were in order. Matt had never done anything like this before and was understandably a little nervous. We cast a circle around a gigantic easy chair in his living room so he could sit comfortably during the 10 or 15 minutes I estimated it would take for the evocation. Before I left Matt's house, I banished the room and consecrated his circle. We briefly reviewed what he was to do in the joint ceremony. It was very simple. After I left, he was to take a shower while he repeated the appropriate verse. He was then to put on his bathrobe, he didn't have a magical robe, and enter his living room temple. He was to place his paper sigil, which was drawn on the back of a letter signed by one of the bank loan officers, in the triangle and his copper sigil around his neck. Then, for the duration of the specified time, he was to remain in the chair within the circle and repeat a short mantra. Belial, thou mighty king, accept thou now this offering, send forth your legions to secure the loan committee's signature. Matt was then to wait in the circle until I returned to banish and close his temple. We synchronized our watches and I rushed home to begin the conjuration at the designated moment. As Belial demands offerings and sacrifices, I decided, with uncharacteristic machismo, that I would initiate the proceedings by scratching the sigil of demon on my left arm with a compass point and then stamping the mark with my blood onto a round piece of parchment. This I placed in the triangle to serve as the material basis for the spirit's manifestation. My conjuration was accompanied by no strange occurrences whatsoever. Although I didn't actually see the spirit in the triangle, my inner senses all informed me loud and clear that Belial greedily accepted my sacrifice of blood and that the object of our operation would succeed. After giving the spirit his charge, I banished the temple and rushed back to Matt's house. I found Matt in his black bathrobe sitting in his big easy chair. He seemed a little shaken. I performed the banishing rituals of the pentagram and hexagram, then asked him how it went. He said, "Well, I'm not sure, but I think I'd like to take another shower. Don't sit in that chair." Matt disappeared into the bathroom and took a quick shower. He returned with a towel and a bottle of pine-scented disinfectant. Without saying a word, he proceeded to thoroughly clean his chair. This was very strange. I didn't know if I wanted to know what was going on. "Let's go get something to eat," he finally said. "My treat." Over dinner, he told me the most remarkable story. In my first draft of this chapter, I wrote down as much as I could remember concerning his story. I read it to Matt to see if there was anything he could add. He said it was fine, but got out his journal of that period just to double check. It was the first time I had ever seen his diary. After reading it, I asked him if he would allow me to reproduce his diary notes instead of using what I had written. He graciously consented. Please excuse his abbreviations and shorthand use of the language. Compared to some of my diary entries, Matt's notes read like Shakespeare. 7:23, 6:30 to 8:15 p.m. Black magic ceremony, demon Belial with Milo to bewitch for a bank loan. Did simultaneously, Milo at his house, me at mine. My part did not go as planned, but think it worked. Very strange, see below. Milo strung clothesline circle around my lazy boy. Inside a cardboard triangle, we put a letter signed by blank from the bank. On the back, Milo drew magic symbol of Belial. Hand-drawn symbol and diary here. Milo also scratched the same sign on 2 copper circles for us to wear around our necks. Milo vanished my house before he went home to do his thing. All I could do was shower and feel holy, and at 6:30 sit in my chair and repeat a poem Milo made up. Belial, Almighty King, accept now this offering, send forth your allegiance to secure the loan committee signature. I too stay in chair till he returns back to vanish my house again. Around 6:10, showered, and tried to read another poem Milo wrote to me. Got it wet, couldn't read it. I put on bathrobe and tried to put medallion around my neck. The chain got snagged on robe and broke. 6:25, sat down in my chair and tried to relax. Too hot for bathrobe, took off, put medallion on the chair between my legs. Sunlight coming in from partially opened front door uncomfortably brightened my eyes. Closed eyes and tried to remember the poem. Hard to say what happened next because so unlike anything that ever. Alright. I fell asleep, sitting up in the chair with the sun in my face. In dream I saw myself reclined in chair with Kay naked and astride me like Tuesday night. It was so unlike her to make love in the daylight. Great sex and started to climax, but in back of my mind knew I was supposed to be doing something else. Note, first wet dream since starting my journals nearly 6 years. I tried to wake up. I was laughing at craziness of whole thing, but I didn't know if I was laughing in dream state or awake. The climax brought me fully conscious, confused, embarrassed, chair wet with issue, medallion covered. I'm not sure what M had in mind for my part of ceremony. Clock read 6:45. M due back soon to vanish. I put on my robe and cleaned up the chair as much as can, and waited inside the circle for him to return. I wasn't sure I was going to, but I told M pretty much everything that happened. He thought I was joking at first and said that nothing like that had ever happened to him. Told me sounds like I got the good half of the demon. I was a bit uncomfortable with the sexual component of Matt's experience, especially because it was not part of the original operation. It seemed uncomfortably like an act of spiritual vampirism. Still, I did not share my concerns with Matt, because I did not want to throw a wet blanket on his enthusiasm over his first magical operation. Furthermore, 3 days later, we learned that the loan committee had approved the loan and offered an additional 15% if Matt so requested. He so requested. The project was on again. I need to point out that everything related to the project seemed to carry with it demonic, even dangerous baggage. This is not to say that things didn't go well. On the contrary, things seemingly went very well indeed. For example, we needed an artist, a cartoonist, who could translate Matt's texts into storyboard cells. To retain such a talent for a 6 to 10 month term could understandably be very expensive. We started our quest in Laguna Beach, talking with the owners of various studios. As we expected, there was no shortage of talent, but none of it affordable. We ended the first day of our search empty-handed. We stopped at a local saloon, one of the most infernal in town, for a beer and sat down right next to our artist. He was old and bald and smoked cheap cigars. The beard around his mouth was stained ugly yellow from years of cigar smoke. He was obnoxiously drunk. The bartender started talking about him as if he couldn't hear what he was saying. That old goat is Jack Barr. He was the smallest man ever to play football for the Rams. The guy's a cartoonist. Here, look. The bartender slid a recent issue of Playboy down the bar. Sure enough, a Jack Barr cartoon. It was very funny. Not only that, but I recognized his style from a score of other Playboy cartoons that I enjoyed over the years. He was for real. He was right in front of us. He most likely would work very cheaply, but he was a hopeless drunk and currently in no condition to talk. The bartender was a wealth of information. He told us the pattern of Barr's life hadn't changed in 15 years. The alcohol in his blood dictated a strict schedule. Each morning, Saturdays and Sundays included, at 10 a.m., he arrived to open his favorite bar. He drank beer, smoked cigars, and ate lightly, mostly pickled eggs and burritos, until 5 p.m., when he had to be home to feed his dog. He did what chores he could manage until around 8 p.m., when he passed out. He woke every morning at 3 a.m., showered and drank black coffee while he drew in his studio. Drew wonderful things, terrible things, little things that he sent out regularly for publication, big things that covered his wall with monstrous specters from his tortured soul. Matt and I appeared at his home at 5:30 a.m. the next day and talked to him about the project. He was perfectly sober and enthusiastic about it. We told him what we could pay, and he accepted without quibbling. Old Jack Barr served us well throughout that entire project, but in order for us to exploit his talent, Matt and I were obliged to radically adjust the schedule of our lives to accommodate the old man's nightmarish daily cycle. The three of us met daily at 6 a.m. to see the newest drawings and lay out plans for the next night's work. We had to carefully write out every detail of instruction because when Jack woke up at 3 a.m., he would be unable to remember the previous day's conversation. Jack Barr was just one of the demon helpers who labored for us on this venture. Each one executed his or her assigned task to our satisfaction, but each also brought with them some vice or infernal flaw that managed to extract from Matt and me some painful measure of personal concession. I am not exaggerating when I say it was truly like working with a pack of demons. Still, the results were impressive. Matt's career was off with a bang. The books were printed. The game was manufactured. Matt lectured at a local university and was discovered by a newspaper reporter who splashed his picture and story across the front page of the accent section of the Sunday Los Angeles Times. This publicity led to the direct mail sale of the entire first edition of the books and game and spawned a dizzying schedule of college lectures. One next request for Belial was to remove any obstacles that might prevent Matt from opening his own counseling center. We performed another joint evocation, which, this time, was not accompanied by strange phenomena. As far as we could tell, the operation was also successful, and Matt was soon the director of his psychological counseling center and the darling of the recovery industry. The center became quite popular. Matt took on 2 additional associates, and the 3 of them booked a full schedule of clients. Matt also facilitated groups in the evenings and held weekend intensives. The money was good. My job was done. Matt got everything he wanted. I got over a year of steady work and a segue to an even better position in commercial real estate. I moved on to my new job, and Matt settled into his blossoming career. We both more or less forgot Belial. Neither of us called him up again to thank him or give him another one of those offerings that he liked so well. Matt just went on with his unambiguous magical will to succeed, and my unambiguous will went on to focus on other things. Belial's joint masters abandoned him, and Matt's fortunes were soon to change. It all started when Elizabeth, Matt's receptionist and secretary, got married to a client of Matt's, a wealthy entrepreneur named Charles, who came to the center to overcome a drug addiction. After they were married, Charles and Elizabeth moved to the Midwest where, for one reason or another, Elizabeth became hopelessly addicted to cocaine. Charles was beside himself and called Matt and made him an offer he could not refuse. Confident in Matt's discretion and ability to help clients overcome drug problems, Charles offered Matt an exorbitant figure to fly to their home and treat Elizabeth on a 24-hour basis until she was clean. He also paid for all lost client fees that Matt would incur while he was away. Matt accepted. The treatment took 5 weeks, during which time Charles confided in Matt the nature of his business. In keeping with the theme of this chapter, I need only say that Charles was a creature of the underworld, and Matt had unwittingly become one of his minions. Predictably, Charles paid Matt in cash that Matt put in his briefcase for the return flight home, a briefcase that was opened by airport officials in the Midwest, airport officials that had questions. Questions Matt would not answer. In all likelihood, the authorities realized that Matt was more or less an innocent acquaintance of Charles, who was in the wrong place at the wrong time carrying a large amount of questionable cash. Nevertheless, they mistakenly believed Matt could give them useful information concerning Charles's operation, and in order to pressure him into cooperate, they arrested him on a number of charges. Bail and subsequent legal fees devastated Matt's finances. He lost his house to foreclosure. As the home loan was the original object of our magical operation, I called Matt and told him that it was clear that Belial had turned against the game plan and urged that we exorcise him from our lives. He agreed. I conjured Belial one last time and gave him license to depart and dismissed him from my service. I then buried his paper sigil and sanded his sign from the copper medallion. I drove to Matt's new home on the beach, and together we performed a brief exorcism. Instead of sanding down his copper medallion, Matt wanted to destroy it by casting it into the sea where it would quickly corrupt in the salt water. We stepped to the water's edge. Matt hurled it with a mighty sweep, and it shot out to sea like a tiny flying saucer. The sea breeze caught it like a frisbee and lifted it a few feet higher than its original trajectory. Suddenly, a seagull intercepted the disc in mid-air and caught it firmly in its beak. Matt and I couldn't believe what we were seeing. We waved our arms and screamed at the bird, hoping it would fly further out to sea and drop it. But it circled back and flew toward Matt's little bungalow. It made a few dips and circles, then dropped the disc in the sand about 50 yards down the beach. We ran to where it appeared to fall and carefully combed the sand, but we could not find it. For the next year, while he fought one expensive legal battle after another, Matt searched for Belial's sigil. He borrowed a metal detector. He built a screen box. He questioned sunbathers who spread their towels in the vicinity. He never found it. He did, however, eventually resolve his awful situation. It took 5 years and all of his resources, but in the end, he neither betrayed his clients nor did he go to jail for his silence. He pulled his life and career back together and ran his counseling center for as long as it was his unambiguous will to do so. There is a magical legend that informs us that King Solomon built the great temple of God with the supernatural help of demons. Afterward, he bound the spirits and imprisoned them in a brass bottle, sealed with a leaden seal, and threw it into a river. One day, a fisherman netted the bottle and innocently unleashed the spirits back into the world. Solomon eventually caught all but 72 of the little devils and sealed them back up again. The remaining 72 are the spirits of the Gosha, including Belial. A couple of years after Matt's unfortunate adventure, he and his new girlfriend were relaxing on the beach with friends who were visiting from Israel. Matt was playing frisbee with the 14-year-old son of their guests when the boy reached into the sand and recovered the lost medallion of Belial. Matt still keeps it in his office in a place of honor. The boy's name was Solomon.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
I'm going to continue reading the excerpt from Visions of a Parallel World from the book Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallee. Throughout medieval times, a major current of thought distinct from official religion existed, culminating in the works of the alchemists and hermetics. Among such groups were to be found some of the early modern scientists and men remarkable for the strength of their independent thinking and for their adventurous life, such as Paracelsus. The nature of the beings who mysteriously appeared, dressed in shiny garments or covered with dark hair, and with whom communication was so hard to establish, intrigued these men intensely. They were the first to relate these strange beings to the creatures described in the Bible and in the writings of the early Kabbalists. According to biblical writers, the heavenly hierarchy includes beings of human form called cherubim, a name that in Hebrew means full of knowledge. Ezekiel describes them in the following terms: their appearance was like burning coals of fire, and the like of the appearance of lamps. It went up and down among the living creatures, and the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning. Are the mysterious creatures who fly through the sky and land in their cloud ships, Agobart's authority notwithstanding, of the same race as the angels? Asked the old philosophers. No, because they are mortal. Quote, the Hebrews used to call these beings who are between the angels and men Sedaim, and the Greeks, transposing the letters and adding but one syllable, called them daemonos. Among the ancient philosophers, these demons were held to be an aerial race, ruling over the elements, mortal, engendering, and unknown to this century and to those who rarely seek truth in her ancient dwelling place, which is to say, in the Kabbalah and in the theology of the Hebrews, who possessed the special art of holding communion with that aerial people and of conversing with all these inhabitants of the air. Plutarch even had a complete theory on the nature of these beings. Quote, he thinks it absurd that there should be no mean between the two extremes of an immortal and immortal being, that there cannot be in nature so vast a flaw, without some intermedial kind of life, partaking of them both, as therefore we find the intercourse between the soul and the body to be made by the animal spirits, so between divinity and humanity there is this species of daemons. It is not surprising then to find that the philosophers disagreed with Agobard on the nature of the three men and the woman who were captured by the mob in Lyon. In vain does the philosopher bring to light the falsity of the chimeras people have fabricated and present manifest proofs to the contrary. No matter what his experience, nor how sound his argument and reasoning, let but a man with a doctor's hood come along and write them down as false. Experience and demonstration count for naught, and it is henceforward beyond the power of truth to reestablish her empire. People would rather believe in a doctor's hood than in their own eyes. There has been in your native France a memorable proof of this popular mania. The famous Kabbalist Zedekias, in the region of your Pepin, took it into his head to convince the world that the elements are inhabited by those people whose nature I have just described to you. The expedient of which he bethought himself was to advise the sylphs to show themselves in the air to everybody. They did so sumptuously. These beings were seen in the air in human form, sometimes in battle array, marching in good order, halting under arms, or encamping beneath magnificent tents. Sometimes on wonderfully constructed aerial ships, whose flying squadrons roved at the will of the zephyrs. What happened? Do you suppose that ignorant age would so much as reason as to the nature of these marvelous spectacles? The people straightway believed that sorcerers had taken possession of the air for the purpose of raising tempests and bringing hail upon their crops. The learned theologians and jurists were soon of the same opinion as the masses. The emperor believed it as well. And this ridiculous chimera went so far that the wise Charlemagne, and after him Louis the Debonair, imposed grievous penalties upon all these supposed tyrants of the air. You may see an account of this in the first chapter of the capitularies of these two emperors. The sylphs, seeing the populace, the pedants, and even the crowned heads thus alarmed against them, determined to dissipate the bad opinion people had of their innocent fleet by carrying off men from every locality and showing them their beautiful women, their republic, and their manner of government, and then sending them down on earth again in diverse parts of the world. They carried out their plan. The people who saw these men as they were descending came running from every direction, convinced beforehand that they were sorcerers who had separated from their companions in order to come and scatter poisons on the fruit and in the springs. Carried away by the frenzy with which such fancies inspired them, they hurried these innocents off to the torture. The great number of them who were put to death by fire and water throughout the kingdom is incredible. One day, among other instances, it chanced at Lyon that 3 men and a woman were seen descending from these aerial ships. The entire city gathered about them, crying out that they were magicians and were sent by Grimaldus, Duke of Beneventum, Charlemagne's enemy, to destroy the French harvest. In vain the four innocents sought to vindicate themselves by saying that they were their own countryfolk and had been carried away a short time since by miraculous men who had shown them unheard of marvels and had desired to give them an account of what they had seen. The frenzied populace paid no heed to their defense, and were on the point of casting them into the fire, when the worthy Agobard, Bishop of Lyons, who had been a monk in that city, had acquired considerable authority there, came running at the noise, and having heard the accusations of the people and the defense of the accused, gravely pronounced that both one and the other were false. That it was not true that these men had fallen from the sky, and that what they said they had seen there was impossible. The people believed what their good father Agobard said rather than their own eyes, were pacified, set at liberty the four ambassadors of the sylphs, and received with wonder the book which Agobard wrote to confirm the judgment which he had pronounced. Thus the testimony of these four witnesses was rendered vain. Such stories were so well established during the Middle Ages that the problem of communicating with the elementals became a major preoccupation of the Hermetics and an important part of their philosophy. Paracelsus wrote an entire book on the nature of these beings, but he took great pains to warn the reader of the dangers of an association with them. Quote, I do not want to say here because of the ills which might befall those who would try it, through which compact one associates with these beings, thanks to which compact they appear to us and speak to us. And in a treatise entitled Why These Beings Appear to Us, he presented the following ingenious theory. Everything God creates manifests itself to man sooner or later. Sometimes God confronts him with the devil and the spirits in order to convince him of their existence. From the top of heaven he also sends the angels, his servants. Thus these beings appear to us not in order to stay among us or become allied to us, but in order for us to become able to understand them. These apparitions are scarce to tell the truth, but why should it be otherwise? Is it not enough for one of us to see an angel in order for all of us to believe in the other angels? Paracelsus was probably born in 1491, and in the very same year, Photius Cardon recorded his observation of 7 strange visitors directly related to the creatures of the elements who were so puzzling to the great philosopher. The incident is preserved in the writings of his son, Jerome Cardon, 1501 to 1576, who is well known to us today as a mathematician. Jerome Cardon lived in Milan and was not only a mathematician but also an occultist and a physician. In his book, De Subtilitate, Cardon explains that he had often heard his father tell a particular story and finally searched for his record of the event, which read as follows. August 13, 1941, when I had completed the customary rites, at about the 20th hour of the day, 7 men duly appeared to me clothed in silken garments resembling Greek togas and wearing, as it were, shining shoes. The undergarments beneath their glistening and ruddy breastplates seemed to be wrought of crimson and were of extraordinary glory and beauty. Nevertheless, all were not dressed in this fashion, but only 2 who seemed to be of nobler rank than the others. The taller of them, who was of ruddy complexion, was attended by 2 companions, and the second, who was fairer and of shorter stature, by 3. Thus in all there were 7. He left no record as to whether their heads were covered. They were about 40 years of age, but they did not appear to be above 30. When asked who they were, they said that they were men composed, as it were, of air, and subject to birth and death. It was true that their lives were much longer than ours, and might even reach to 300 years' duration. Questioned on the immortality of our soul, they affirmed that nothing survives which is particular to the individual. When my father asked them why they did not reveal treasures to men if they knew where they were, they answered that it was forbidden by a peculiar law under the heaviest penalties for anyone to communicate this knowledge to men. They remained with my father for over 3 hours. But when he questioned them as to the cause of the universe, they were not agreed. The tallest of them denied that God had made the world from eternity. On the contrary, the other added that God created it from moment to moment, so that should he desist for an instant, the world would perish. Be this fact or fable, so it stands. Nearly 3 centuries later, in September 1768, a young man of 16 was traveling to the University of Leipzig with 2 passengers from Frankfurt. Most of the journey was accomplished in the rain, and the coach sometimes had trouble moving uphill. On one occasion, when the passengers had left their seats to walk behind the horses, the young man noticed a strange luminous object at ground level. Quote, all at once, in a ravine on the right-hand side of the way, I saw a sort of amphitheater, wonderfully illuminated. In a funnel-shaped space, there were innumerable little lights gleaming, ranged step-fashioned over one another, and they shone so brightly that the eye was dazzled. But what still more confused the sight was that they did not keep still, but jumped about here and there, as well downwards from above as vice versa and in every direction. The greater part of them, however, remained stationary and beamed on. It was only with the greatest reluctance that I suffered myself to be called away from the spectacle, which I could have wished to examine more closely. The postillion, when questioned, said that he knew nothing about such a phenomenon, but that there was in the neighborhood an old stone quarry, the excavation of which was filled with water. Now, whether this was a pandemonium of will-o'-the-wisps or a company of luminous creatures, I will not decide. The young man in question was Goethe. You will find this sighting in the 6th book of his autobiography, according to Kenneth Anger, to whom I am indebted for this very interesting discovery. Would the German poet and scientist have had occasion to learn more about the luminous creatures had he lived in the 20th century? If Paracelsus came back, would he find new material for his theories on the nature of the strange and fugitive races of beings from the sky? We can safely hypothesize that their attention would be immediately directed to the files of UFO landings. On the night of January 1958, a lady whose name I am not authorized to publish was driving along the New York State Thruway in the vicinity of Niagara Falls in the midst of a violent snowstorm. The exact time was 1:30 a.m. The lady was going to visit her son, then in the army, and she was driving very carefully, trying to find an exit, for she believed the thruway was closed ahead of her. Visibility was extremely bad, and she had no chance to think when she suddenly saw what seemed to be an airplane wreck on the center parkway. A large shape was visible, and a slim rod at least 50 feet high was illuminated and getting shorter as though it were sinking into the ground. My motor slowed down, and as I came closer, my car stopped completely. I became panicky and tried desperately to start it, as I had no lights. My first thought was to get out and see what was happening, but I suddenly saw two shapes rising around that slim pole which was still growing shorter. They were suspended but moving about it. They seemed to be like animals with 4 legs and a tail, but 2 front feelers under the head like arms. Then before I could even gasp, the things disappeared and the shape rose, and I then realized it was a saucer. It spun and zoomed about 10 feet off the ground and up into the air, and I could not even see where it went. My lights suddenly came on. I started the car and it was all right. I pulled up to that place, got out with a flashlight, and walked over to where it had been sitting. A large hole was melted in the snow about a foot across, and grass was showing on it. The grass was warm, but nothing was dug up around there. The lady, who met only with disbelief when she told her story to her family, reported the case in a letter to Otto Binder when his syndicated series Our Space Age began to appear in a number of newspapers. The most puzzling element in this account is not so much what is described, but the fact that such stories have become, since 1946, rather common in all parts of the world. To a physicist, of course, they appear unbelievable, just as the strange mannequin met by St. Anthony would appear unbelievable to a biologist. Yet, there are several cases on record in which similar accounts are associated with traces that can hardly be questioned. In the celebrated incident at Socorro, New Mexico, it was a policeman, Lonnie Zamora, who reported seeing 2 small beings dressed in white close to a shiny egg-shaped object which rested on 4 pads before it took off with a thunderous noise, only to become perfectly silent as it flew away. The incident took place on April 24, 1964, and was the occasion for some interesting measurements, by local police officials and a Federal Bureau of Investigation man, of the traces left by the object, and of some even more interesting deductions by William T. Powers on the possible mechanical construction of the landing gear. Here again we observe an emotional pattern strangely reminiscent of the medieval scene just surveyed. The witness in the Socorro case, when he was about to be interviewed by Air Force investigators, was so little convinced that he had observed a device of human construction that he asked to see a priest before releasing his report to the authorities. Then, of course, there is the report of the Kentucky family who claimed to have been besieged by several little men, whose appearance was completely fantastic. The incident occurred on the night of April 21, 1955, and was the occasion of many strange observations of the behavior of the visitors. One of the creatures was seen approaching the farmhouse with both hands raised. When it was about 20 feet away, 2 of the witnesses shot at the intruder. It did a flip and was lost in the darkness. Then it appeared at the window when the men came back inside the house and was again shot at. Another creature seen on the roof was knocked over by a bullet, but instead of falling, it floated to the ground. The entities had oversized heads, almost perfectly round, and very long arms, terminating in huge hands armed with talons. They wore a sort of glowing aluminum suit, which is reminiscent of the sylphs of 1491. Their eyes were very large and apparently very sensitive. They always approached the house from the darkest corner. The eyes had no pupils and no eyelids. The eyes were much larger than human eyes and set on the side of the head. The creatures generally walked upright, but when shot at, they would run on all fours with extreme rapidity, and their arms seemed to provide most of the propulsion. On September 10, 1954, in Croix-Roubaix, a small French village near the Belgian border, at about 10:30 p.m., Marius de Wilde stepped outside and was at once intrigued by a dark mass on the railroad tracks. De Wilde then heard footsteps in the night. Turning on his light, he found himself facing 2 beings wearing very large helmets and what seemed to be heavy diving suits. They had broad shoulders, but de Wilde did not see their arms. They were less than 4 feet tall. De Wilde moved toward them with the intention of intercepting them, but a light appeared on the side of the dark object on the tracks, and de Wilde found he could not make a single move. When he regained control of his body, the 2 visitors then re-entered the supposed machine and flown away. This classic observation had a strange sequel, never before published. French civilian investigators who studied the case were cooperating closely with local police officials, but there were other people on the site, notably representatives of the air police from Paris. When an inquiry was made regarding the analysis performed on some stones found calcined at the spot where the saucer had been seen by de Wilde, it was discovered that even the police could not obtain information as to the results of the analyses. In the words of the local police chief, the official body working in liaison with the Air Force Police belongs to the Ministry of National Defense. The very name of this ministry excludes the idea of any communication. On November 19, 1954, the following facts came to light. The police confirmed that de Wilde had made a second report concerning an observation of an object in the vicinity of his home. We were later to learn that the report in fact described a landing. However, the police said, "DeWilt and his family have decided, for fear of adverse publicity, to take no one in their confidence regarding the second occurrence. Therefore, you will find no mention of it in local newspapers." Furthermore, civilian investigators were told, politely but in no uncertain terms, that any further information on such incidents would be kept confidential by the police. Reports continued, however, and some of them would have delighted Paracelsus. On October 14, 1954, a miner named Starovsky claimed to have met, on a country road near Irchin, also in the north of France, a strange being of small height and bulky figure with large slanted eyes and a fur-covered body. This little person, less than 4 feet tall, had a large head and wore a brown skull cap which formed a fillet a few inches above the eyes. The eyes protruded with very small irises, the nose was flat, the lips were thick and red. A minor detail, the witness did not claim he had seen the creature emerge from a flying saucer or re-enter it. He just happened to meet the strange being, who did not wear any kind of respiratory device. Before he could think of stopping him, the creature had disappeared. 6 days later, on October 20th, 1954, in Pervesino d'Erba, near Como, Italy, a man had just put his car in the garage when he saw a strange being covered with a luminous suit, about 4 feet tall, standing near a tree. When he saw the motorist, the creature aimed a beam from some sort of flashlight at him, paralyzing the witness until a motion he made when clenching the fist holding the garage keys seemed to free him. He rushed to attack the stranger, who rose from the ground and fled with a soft whirring sound. The author of this unbelievable story was 37 years old and was known locally as a trustworthy man. He arrived home in a state of great shock and went to bed with a high fever. The details of the case were obtained through an investigation by the Italian police. 11 years later, the files of landing reports and strange creatures associated with them had become very thick indeed. Then a new flurry of reports began. On July 1st, 1965, Maurice Mas, a French farmer who lived in Valençol, had the following experience. As he arrived in his field at 6 a.m. and was getting ready to start his tractor, he heard an unusual noise. Stepping into the open, he saw a machine that had landed in his lavender field. He thought it must be some sort of prototype and walked toward it, with a mind to tell the pilots, in no uncertain words, to go find another landing spot for their contraption. It was only when he was within 20 feet of the machine that he came in full view of the scene and realized his mistake. The object was egg-shaped, had a round cockpit, was supported by 6 thin legs and a central pivot, and was not bigger than a car. In front, appearing to examine a lavender plant, were the 2 pilots. They were dressed in one-piece gray-greenish suits. On the left side of their belts was a small container, a larger one was on the right side. They were less than 4 feet tall and had human eyes, but their heads were very large, about 3 times the volume of a human head. They had practically no mouth, only a very small opening without lips. They wore no respiratory device, no headgear, and no gloves. They had small normal hands. When Moss came upon them, they seemed to become suddenly aware of his existence, and yet it was without any indication of fear or surprise that one of the pilots took a small tube from its container and pointed it at Moss, with the result that the witness found himself suddenly incapable of moving. For the next 60 seconds or so, the 2 entities looked at Moss. They appeared to be exchanging their impressions vocally in a sort of gargle. These sounds came from their throats, insisted the witness, but the mouths did not move. The eyes, in the meantime, conveyed human expressions. In private, Moss told the civilian investigator that he had not been frightened by their attitude and that it contained more friendly curiosity than hostility toward him. After some time, estimated Moss, as I have said, as about 1 minute, the creatures went inside the craft. The door closed, like the front part of a wooden file cabinet, but Moss couldn't see them through the cockpit. They were facing him as the object took off in the opposite direction, first hovering a few feet from the ground, then rising obliquely with the takeoff speed of a jet plane. When it was about 60 yards away, it vanished. The witness was closely questioned on this last point by French scientists who were privately interested by the case, but Moss insisted he could not say whether the object went away so fast that the eye could not follow it, or whether it actually disappeared. He made it quite clear, however, that one moment the thing was there and the next moment it was not there anymore. Moss remained alone in his field, paralyzed. The word paralysis is not properly used in connection with incidents of this type. Moss said that he remained conscious during the whole observation. His physiological functions, respiration, heartbeat, were not hampered, but he could not move. Then he became very frightened indeed. Alone in his field, unable to even call for help, Moss thought he was going to die. It was only after about 20 minutes that he gradually regained voluntary control of his muscles and was able to go home. There is a sequel to his experience. For several weeks after the incident, Moss was overcome with drowsiness, and all his relatives, as well as the investigators, observed that he needed so much sleep that he found it difficult to stay awake even for 4 hours at a time. This is another little-known characteristic of close proximity cases. To Moss, who was used to working from sunup to sundown, as the early hour of his observation itself shows, this was a very impressive and disturbing consequence of his experience. Another result of the publicity the case attracted was the great damage to Moss's field, as crowds of tourists gathered to see the traces left by the craft. At this point, I should say that Moss is a man respected in the community. A former resistance fighter, a conscientious and successful farmer, he is regarded as absolutely trustworthy by the police authorities who investigated the case under the direction of Captain Valnet of Digne. Yet this man tells us a story that does not simply appear fanciful, it is completely unbelievable. What is Mass's impression of the visitors? For some reason, he says he knows they meant no harm. They were not hostile to him, only indifferent. As he stood facing them during that long minute, he suddenly was overcome with the certitude that they were good, a belief he is unable to rationalize, because at no point did he understand their strange language.
Science can explain everything if we look hard enough.
Shut up, science bitch.
Nothing is true. Everything is real.
Not only is he like ruining my life, but with all this God shit that he's into, he could be ruining my afterlife.
It's a sort of interdimensional vagina that somehow appears. I can interact with it.
Fabric of the entire universe could be torn apart.
I know my mind is changing. I'm already too far gone to know what to do.